let's have a look at what we want to talk about. So basically, look at leading in times of crisis. And then, as I said, I want to touch at the end a little bit on resilience, but use the chat function as you need to. Something that to me is firstly interesting is when we read up on leadership and leading in times of crisis, they've sort of coined, I don't know if it's a new term, but we see, as it's new to me, and that is what we call a landscape crisis. So here's some nice jargon, probably came from an academic. But basically what they're saying is you have your sort of crisis, which would be your routine emergency versus a landscape crisis. Now, the COVID-19 is clearly a landscape crisis. It's basically the entire world, not just the entire country or continent of Africa. So a routine emergency would be where something horrible happens in one's business and it is a crisis and we've got to deal with it. And that in the Java terms would possibly be on your manufacturing side, where perhaps a production line goes down and you cannot produce something and you have a crisis and you need to find urgent ways to fix that problem. Landscape crisis is it hits everybody and it is worldwide. And apart perhaps previously from wars and world wars, I don't know that we've had in a landscape crisis. And in my generation, and obviously yours, seeing as most of you are a lot younger than me, would not have experienced a landscape crisis. But we're definitely dealing with a landscape crisis, and how does one lead there? And as I've already said, you could argue to a degree that we're not at the beginning, we hopefully through the middle. And I'm basing a lot of what I'm saying around the leadership on work done by McKinsey, and they talk about some core actions that you need to take when you are faced with a landscape crisis. And as I've said, some of these we've already had to do, and we did them well or badly or by default, but these are some of the these are the 5 core actions that we talk about in terms of dealing with a crisis. And it's how do we keep our leadership? What is our role as a leader during a time of crisis? And I'm going to go through each of these, but the first one is organized via a network of teams. Then it is display deliberate, calm, and bounded optimism, not unbounded, but bounded optimism. Make decisions amid uncertainty, show empathy, and communicate effectively. And let's take a look at each of these. So we start off by organizing via a network of teams. And it's interesting what these guys say is normal command and control tends not to work. So quite often, even regardless of what our management and leadership style is, even if I'm a participative manager, there's a kind of a thing when we have a problem, it's a normal command and control, take control, sort things out, get people to do things. And what they're saying, certainly in the early days of a crisis, a landscape crisis, that tends not to work. Leaders cannot, and the reason why is because leaders cannot collect information and respond quickly enough. When we first started finding out about COVID-19, we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how it was going to affect us. We had many, many horror stories, many of which have come true. And therefore, you don't have enough information to use a command and control, because command and control means I know what's happening. I'm going to make the decisions. I'm going to tell people what to do. COVID-19, nobody knew what was happening and what was going to happen. And we did not know what we needed to do at a country level, at a government level, and at an organizational level. So what we need to do, or what they're saying in terms of organized via a network of teams, is we need to get as much information as possible, determine what needs to be known or addressed. And what these guys are saying is, instead of using your typical organizational hierarchy, quite often what will happen is you will need to set up a network of teams. And it's not about hierarchy and it's not about status. It's about getting people together to work on gathering information, coming up with ideas, taking action. So they say one of the first things we have to do is to set up a network of teams. And quite possibly that's what you guys at Java did in the early days of the crisis. It's certainly what I know we did in Strathmore. And I also lecture at Wits Business School in Johannesburg, and I know that's what they were doing there. So it's basically saying we need a person or a group of people who can look at A, and somebody can look at B, and another one to look at C and D. So you set up teams. And those teams are highly adaptable, or highly adaptable assembly of groups. So it's a whole lot of groups or people working on issues. So for example, we had at the university, somebody needed to find out about things like we're using now Zoom and MS Teams, and we have all attended Zoom meetings, but very few people were that skilled and literate in terms of how do we set it up, how do we run it, how do we share screens, how do we set up sub-teams, etc., etc. So what we had at the university is we had a group of people, okay, you guys go and find out about that. We need to know what's happening with COVID-19. We need to know what are the impacts. So I want a COVID-19 facts group. I want a group that is following and monitoring the government's actions. I want another group that is looking, for example, at Strathmore, we needed to come up with data, free data or affordable data. So we have a team for that. So we're setting up these network teams that doesn't necessarily go according to hierarchical structure. It's saying, I need this done, united by a common purpose, and they collaborated to achieve required outcomes. So this is how you get that information as quickly as possible in an effective manner, because you need that information then to be able to make decisions and take action. The other core element they say that is important in terms of organizing via a team, a network of teams, is also to share and distribute authority. So for these people to be able to gather that information, for them to be able to progress, they need some kind of authority. So for example, what we had at the university is we needed to find out how do we get data that is affordable to our students. And basically the team was set up to go and speak to the Safaricoms, and a certain amount of authority was given. Guys, go and see what you can negotiate. And rather than following the old format of command and control and come back, a certain amount of authority and autonomy was given. Go out, you've got the mandate, sort it out. And so that would be an example of sharing and distributing authority, which might not, as I say, follow your typical organizational hierarchy and structures. But we need information to be able to make decisions, and they're saying this is where you set up that team. And this is particularly in a landscape crisis. The next one is a very interesting point, and that is to display deliberate calm and bounded optimism. And we split the two, and they're both very interesting concepts. Because when we have a crisis, particularly a landscape crisis, now suddenly we need to be able to make decisions, but we need to have as much information as possible, and we need to think as carefully and effectively as possible. So we say that in routine emergencies, then experience is the issue, all right? So when I have a problem in the manufacturing line at the plant for Java, then I want the most knowledgeable engineer, the most knowledgeable production person to come in and sort this out. In a novel landscape crisis, they say, which is very interesting, it's not so much about experience, because nobody has experience in COVID-19 and dealing with a pandemic of this magnitude. So you cannot find the person who's got the experience. You will use whatever experience and knowledge you have, but now it is about character. All right. So in a landscape crisis, character is of the utmost importance. In other words, the strength of character of that leader, the leadership becomes so important. And they talk about these two concepts that you want in your leaders. And that is, which the one is the deliberate calm, and the other one is bounded optimism. And both of them are interesting and I think very, very important. One is deliberate calm, and it's defined there as the ability to detach from fraught situations and think clearly, right, about how one will navigate. Because what we have in any crisis is that people go into panic mode. And then we start making knee-jerk reactions and knee-jerk decisions and do this and do that. We don't even have all of the information that we need. We don't know how we're going to manage it. And we just start making these snap decisions. And what they're saying here is we need this deliberate calm, the ability to detach from that situation, to think clearly about how one is going to navigate it, the ability to kind of calm yourself down and focus on what do we know, what do we not know, how are we going to deal with these issues. And they say that deliberate calm is most often found in well-grounded individuals who possess humility. In other words, they're willing to listen, but not helplessness. So they don't just give up. They have the strong sense of resolve. We will succeed, but let's calm down, let's listen, let's get the facts. So deliberate calm to me is a nice, interesting element of leadership in the state of crisis. And the next one, probably, I think it must be one of the most important, and that is bounded optimism, not unbounded, right? Bounded optimism or confidence combined with realism. Particularly, we saw it in COVID-19. Early in a crisis, if leaders display excessive confidence, they lose credibility. So if you have got a leader, we have no clue what's going on, we have no clue how it's going to affect Java, it's no clue how it's going to affect our operation, our customers, our revenue, our manufacturing side, and you get this person who just does huge rah-rah speeches of we're going to be successful and we're going to overcome this. What that does is it hurts the credibility, because people are looking at this guy or girl and saying, but you couldn't know that. You're just giving me nonsense. So what is it that these leaders have, apart from the deliberate calm, is this bounded optimism. In other words, it's controlled. We don't know what's going on. We're very scared. We're very worried, but we will succeed. They display confidence or display confidence that the organization will find a way through the tough situation, but show that they recognize the crisis uncertainty. When the crisis passed, then this optimism can become less bounded. But what we're really saying is the leader is able to show a belief and an optimism that we will succeed, we'll find a way through. But that's not just rah-rah speeches, which hurts and breaks the credibility of that individual. And just, we have a very interesting example from where I'm sitting in South Africa. As we had throughout the world, we have our leaders who then start talking to the people. And in South Africa, when we first started, we had our first case of COVID. And I think within a week of our first case, we had our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, who, together with the government, announced a state of disaster. So it wasn't quite a state of emergency, but a state of disaster, which gives certain control to the government and that type of thing. And then I think within about 4 or 5 days of the announcement of the state of disaster, he then went on TV and he then announced the lockdown. But he did a particularly good job of this bounded optimism. He also displayed good deliberate calm, but bounded optimism. In other words, we will find a way, we will survive, we will take care of people, we don't know what's going on, we don't know how it's going to affect us, we all need to pull together. And he did a particularly good job of giving people some kind of hope for the future, some sense the government knew what they were doing, they would find a way through it, although they didn't have all of the answers. And that was a nice example of bounded optimism. Interestingly, as an aside, if you look at South African political situation and how the government is dealing with it now, we're not so sure that we have the same optimism that he created in us, but that's a totally different story. So basically, these leaders have the ability, they put together a network of groups, of teams who can gather this information. They then are able to show some kind of calm, deliberation, but they also show that optimism of we will succeed, we will find a way through. So those are the first two. We then go on to number 3, and here it is the ability to make decisions amid uncertainty. And again, a very, very important one in a time of crisis, because we say then, and this is very true, in times of crisis, people seek direction. When we don't know what's going on, we need to know, what should we do? Excuse me, what action is happening? What are other people doing? What's the government doing? But very much, if you're looking at a Java scenario, what is the company doing? What is my boss doing? And what do I need to do? They want to know where they are going, and they need to know what they need to do. So what is it that we want from leaders in this third point is they have the ability to make informed decisions. And obviously one has to emphasize informed, because as I've said earlier, it's not just knee-jerk panic decisions, because those are ineffective. They make informed decisions. So they've got their network, they're gathering information, they basically are able to calm themselves, all right? And then they are able to make informed decisions. And something that I find very interesting and very valuable is the cycle that they use to make those informed decisions, which is pause, assess, anticipate, and act. So pause as in stop and listen and gather information and think this through. So they pause, they don't just knee-jerk react. They assess and understand whatever information they have got and also understanding what they don't have. They anticipate what could happen, so scenario planning becomes very important, and then they take action. And they take action in a very decisive way. So they pause, assess, anticipate, and act, for it helps leaders to maintain a state of deliberate calm and avoid overreacting to new information that comes to light, that pause. And you guys will have seen it as much as I've seen it, the amount of information that was going around social media and Twitter and WhatsApp and Facebook, and half of it, if not more, was totally false. And if we just grab a piece of information and we react, then basically we find all sorts of crazy things. And I think we saw it in Nairobi, we certainly saw it in South Africa, at the first beginnings of COVID-19, the first rumors of it, the possibility of lockdowns, the amount of panic buying was ridiculous. And a nice, interesting example that applies to me is we had, when they went into our lockdown, and we've had level 5, then 4, then 3, where we are now. In level 5, everything was locked down. Basically, you could go to the shop to buy groceries, you could go to the doctor, you could go to the pharmacist. But basically, if you weren't in essential services, all businesses were closed, you stayed at home. Consequence of that is that all alcohol was banned. You could not buy alcohol. And so those people who had a good wine cellar were fine, and those people who did not basically battled. And just an interesting example of pause, assess, anticipate, and act is there were rumors on Friday and over the weekend on social media that the government was going to go back to the banning of alcohol. And on Monday morning, yesterday morning, I bought 2 cases of wine just in case. Now, that was totally unsubstantiated. I did not pause. I did not anticipate or assess. I just acted. So not very clever, because they haven't done that. But this is what leaders need to be able to do, is they need to be able to make informed decisions. And interesting, they talked about 2 cognitive behaviors that are particularly relevant and important in that pause, assess, anticipate, and act cycle. And the first one is updating. In other words, keep adding information, keep adding information. So you don't just get information and assume that's it, and then you make all of your decisions from there. You are continuously taking in new information. You're reading what's going on. You're aware of what's going on, which means you are looking at social media as well. But as much as you're continuously updating, and hopefully you've got more scientific information than social media, you also have the second point, which I find so very important, and that is doubting. In other words, they take in new information, and then there's this assessment of this information. Is this real? Is this valid? Does this information come from a reliable source? Can I trust this information? So basically, they make informed decisions, they think. All right, pause, assess, anticipate, and act, and they doubt, but they also update, or they update and they doubt. But now that they've gathered this information, they've decided what needs to be done, they then act with resolve. Visible decisiveness builds an organization's confidence in leaders and motivates the network of teams to persevere. So as much as they are very cautious and they're pausing and assessing and anticipating, when they act decisively. Not stupidly, not autocratically, but they say, okay, what we have done is we've analyzed this, this, and this. Because of that, we are doing A and B and C. And they act with resolve. They are decisive. And that gives people the confidence that they need. And if you look at yourselves as managers, if I work for you, if I report to you and you are my manager, I want to know that you've thought things through. I want to know that you know that it's not a perfect situation. I want to know that you are aware that this is risky, but I also want to know that you have thought things through. You've been open to new ideas. If somebody's come up with a new idea, you are open to that. And then I want to know what to do. And if I have faith in you as my manager and my leader, then I am able to follow what you are saying. And that's when I need to see the decisiveness and that action. Okay, so basically we can make decisions amid this uncertainty. And then the next one is showing empathy. and a very important one, because basically, and you guys know it as well as I do, you're dealing with people's lives. We have got people are taking pay cuts. We've got people who are unpaid leave. We've got people who are already battling in Africa, be you in South Africa or East Africa. We've got many of our employees in Java who are battling, and now suddenly they're on unpaid leave. How do they feed their families, etc.? And we can't solve all of those things, but we can have empathy for that. So the fourth one is these leaders show empathy. In a landscape crisis, people's minds turned first to their own survival and their own basic needs, and how am I going to cope? And if I'm a manager, I've got a whole number of fears. How do I cope with a salary cut? I'm already stretched. Now suddenly I've got this, and how do I cope with that? And what do I do with my children? And I may be a parent working for Java, and now I've got my children at home. I've got to try and find some way of homeschooling, etc., etc. So people tend to look at themselves and their situation and what are we doing. What is it that the manager and leader has to do is understand and manage those fears of their own, but also have some empathy and understanding for others. And this is where the leader really needs to come to the fore in terms of dealing with people and talking to people. And the second bullet point there says leaders shouldn't assign communications and legal staff to address these questions. And the third point is leaders need to uphold a vital aspect or element of their role, which is make a positive difference in people's lives. The point that they're making here is this is where the leader needs to come to the fore in terms of understanding people, and we'll see on the next point that ability to communicate with those people. And that doesn't mean you're not going to use your communications department and your legal department, but this is where I as the manager or I as the leader need to be visible and need to be seen and need to really understand what is it that my people are going through. And if we look at people that we have in Java who are sitting at senior levels, you've got so many areas that you have to focus on. You've got to focus on the survival of the business. You've got to focus on shareholders. You've got to focus on stakeholders, but you've also got to understand where are your staff coming from and what are they dealing with. So that's the ability to understand where others are coming from. And basically to try and make a difference to the lives of all stakeholders. And one of the challenges we have is how do I safeguard as much as possible my staff? Because in this world, we need as leaders to look after our people, probably more than anything else. The last bullet point there, affected people in particular ways. Leaders should pay careful attention to how people are struggling and take corresponding measures to support them. And that's very, very tough when we've got reducing resources and certain stores are closed and we are reducing our income has reduced. We're not reducing it, our income is reduced. Therefore, there's less money. How do we understand these people? How do we support these people as much as we possibly can, given that we've also got to safeguard the survival of our organization? So it's that ability to have real, genuine empathy and understanding for others. And then the final one is to communicate effectively. And also, as with all of these five, vitally important, to maintain transparency and to provide frequent updates. And they talk about two core issues that tend to go wrong in leaders, senior leaders, when they're going through a landscape crisis. And that is the first one I've already talked about, is this overconfident rah-rah speech, which harms the credibility. But the other thing that we quite often do badly in organizations is we take too long to communicate. And we do it for the right reason. We take a long time to communicate because we need to know the facts, and we're waiting for the facts, and we're waiting for more information. But if we take too long, we lose our people. They need to have regular and frequent communication. People are quite happy to accept that the leader might not know, but at least the leader is keeping me informed. So we say that. Often leaders hit the wrong note, taking an overconfident, upbeat tone, all right, and this leads to suspicion, those rah-rah speeches. But the second one is that they take too long, waiting for more information. So what we're saying there is, in times of crisis, you need to keep that communication channel going. And you can't just say the same thing every single day, we understand that, but you're always updating, you're always informing. And even if half the message is, hey guys, we still don't know, but this is what we do know, and that's what we're going to do, and we found this out, and that's how we're going to manage this, rather over-communicate than under-communicate. And we say neither approach is reassuring. Transparency is job one for leaders in a crisis. Be clear on what you know now and what you don't know, and what you're doing to find out or to learn more. Thoughtful, frequent communication shows that leaders are following the situation and adjusting to responses as they learn more. This helps them reassure stakeholders, not just shareholders, stakeholders, that they are confronting the crisis. Okay, so nice, interesting list of ideas and suggestions in managing and leading a crisis. And let's just quickly recap. So we are able to communicate effectively. We can show empathy for our people. We can make decisions which are informed, and then we come across and we make those decisions decisively, right, to build credibility. We have that deliberate calm and bounded optimism, and the very first one is that ability to get information, and we tend to do that via our network. All right, so those are just some interesting ideas. However, as I said when I started, to a fair degree, we could say that we're kind of in the middle of this. We either did those things or we didn't. We either did them well or we did them badly, but we kind of in the middle. So we've got through a whole lot of it. Where to from here? What happens now that we're mid-crisis and hopefully getting closer to the end of the crisis, but I doubt that Africa is close to the end. I think we're sitting mid-crisis. And so basically we have reacted and we have responded. And what now? And then basically another nice model is looking at the different stages of dealing with a crisis, and our actions now need to be re-aim and relaunch. Okay, so just a nice, interesting model here is lead with clarity and speed through the 4 phases of the crisis. So they're saying basically their phase 1 is we react. All right, and that's what companies did, and I'm sure that's what Java did at the beginning of this COVID-19 and your curfew, etc. Is you react, you take action with as much information as possible. As they say there, you seal the hatches, you try and keep everyone safe and man the stations and get things done. Then you move on to phase 2, which is respond. So we've reacted and sort of dealt with the short-term issues. And now we respond, and now we start putting some basic plans into place. We're getting, I think, to phase 3. And I would imagine that Java is in that phase. And that is where we now start to re-aim. Right, we set a new course. So now the questions in an organization such as Java is, okay, so firstly, how long is this going to last for? What are we doing over this, let's call it hopefully interim phase? But we're always hearing that this is the new normal, things are going to be different, we're never going to go back to where we were. So now we need to create a very clear picture of Java into the future, of how much of the old reality will we be able to get back? Will we be able to get our branches full again and people coming in and regularly eating inside? Are we going to see more of a permanent shift to more takeaway? Are we going to have more of a Mr. Delivery type thing? So what is this new normal like? What's my interim? So we've dealt with a short-term crisis. What's my interim? So maybe it's going to take us a good few months to get back to a regular form of business. So what is my process for this interim? Let's say for, I don't know what it would be, but probably for the remainder of this year, or at least probably for the next 6 months, right? And then after that, what am I doing? How are we going to get back to our old normal? And what will we lose and what will we gain? So now we re-aim. Now we set a new course. So now you probably need to have your interim plan and you need to have your long-term plan. You've developed and executed your crisis plan. Now, what is my interim? How am I going to manage the next few months? We're going to have less branches open. We're going to have less footprint coming through. We're hopefully going to see it increasing. We're probably going to have a greater amount of takeaway. We're possibly going to have a lot more sort of delivery type service. So basically, let me come up with my interim plan. So we orientate and calibrate this new course, but you've got a medium-term plan, and then also what is your long-term plan? And this is where one needs to be strongly strategic and visionary and have a look at your industry into the future. Is it going to change? What is it going to look like in 2021 and 2022 from the beginning of 2020? All right, and is it going to be different, and how do I then set myself up for that? So you develop a new strategy to suit the new normal, and then you go on to phase 4, which is you now launch that. This is where you've got to engage your people again, you've got to explain your theory, your strategy, and you've got to implement your interim and then start setting the foundations for your longer term strategy. So that's kind of a nice way of having a look at basically what one has to do from going forward from here. And I believe we are sitting at that phase 3 and phase 4. Okay, so that's pretty much where to from here, and what I think would be necessary and would be required. Okay, I then want to spend, the next model is really just a repeat of that. I want to then spend a little bit of time, ladies and gentlemen, on the time that I have left, and we're going to stop at about 12 for questions, but that gives me another 20 minutes just to have a look at another issue, which I think is vitally important for managers and leaders in any time, but particularly in a time of crisis, and that is the issue of resilience. All right, as a manager, as a leader within Java and within any organization in Africa, but throughout the world, one needs to have that resilience. And let's first start off with what I see as a definition. And resilience, and I'm using a very practical definition rather than an academic one. Resilience is the tendency or the ability to bounce back, the ability to keep going even during harsh and difficult times. And I think most of us know this, if not all of us know this, that resilience has always been a key differentiator in success, all right? And we know that because if you're looking at staff and you're looking at who do I want to employ, people are those who are able to bounce back. Right, my problem people may be very bright and brilliant and whatever, but when there's a problem, they collapse into a heap. I need people who will bounce back. So it is a key differentiator, and it's always been a key differentiator of success for people. All right, and as I say, there it becomes even more important in a crisis because we have chaos, we have people who are scared, we have problems happening, we are losing money, whatever it may be, and I need people, and we need people who are resilient and will bounce back. All right, and we discuss the concept of resilience from an individual point of view. What is it that the individual needs, and what am I looking for, and what are we looking for in resilience as an individual, but then also from an organizational point of view. It's not just how do I, as a manager, lead in Java, am resilient, but what am I doing to create a sense of resilience in my team, in my branch, etc. So basically, we look at it at an individual level and an organizational level. Individual level, as I've said, it's the ability to bounce back, the ability to keep going, it's the ability to overcome adversity, it's the ability to say, hey, this is not cool, not what I planned, but let's carry on. And then, as I've already said, at an organizational level, it's not only to maintain that resilience yourself, but also in your company. The ability to foster and build resilience within your team, your division, and within an entire Java. The new normal, and we hear this often, and it's now hackneyed, but the new normal we are experiencing and can anticipate to continue experiencing highly adverse conditions for the foreseeable future. And certainly COVID is not going away very, very quickly. We will get to sort of a new normal of coping with it, and then hopefully eventually it will disappear. But we're certainly looking, if you read what people are saying, we're certainly looking at the remainder of 2020 and possibly going into 2021 as well. And what is that going to mean? And you guys know this, it's things like job loss, reduced earnings, new way of working, new way of interacting. In the past, my ability to get loyal customers in Java was through bringing them into my branch and seating them and serving them well. And that gave me client or customer loyalty, etc., etc. Now, suddenly I may not have that because these are takeaways. These are Mr. Delivery type of customers. How do I deal with that? How do I find ways to build my client base, maintain my client base, ensure customer satisfaction when perhaps I don't have the face-to-face interaction that I used to have? So we have this new normal. We need resilience at an individual level. You as a manager, leader have to be able to bounce back. You've got to be able to create a team, a division, a company that has that resilience. And if we have a look from my knowledge of Java over the past, that's something that you guys have done well. You have been able to persevere and keep going and overcome obstacles, and that's why, in my view, well, that's where a lot of success of Java has come from over the past. So let's have a look at it in terms of resilience at an individual level. And what are the foundations of resilience? What causes certain people to be more resilient than others? All right. And it can be, and part of resilience I see as an attitude. Some people have more of a resilient attitude than others. And that is a function of self-belief. And it's very, very interesting. If you're looking at self-belief, you're not necessarily looking at what we typically describe as self-confidence. Because self-confidence is seen as that person who's confident and able to speak out and comes across as sure of himself or herself. There's a difference between self-belief and self-confidence, because sometimes people who have this quiet self-belief might not come across as the loud, confident person, but they have this inner resolve. They have a belief, I will succeed, I will cope, I will handle this. They may not do the rah-rah speeches, but they have an inner, deep level of self-belief. Another element of resilience, if we consider resilience being part of an attitude, it's energy. People who have a resilient attitude have energy, they have enthusiasm, they have passion. And even when it's tough, they overcome that toughness and they feel down for a couple of minutes, and then they bounce back and they've got energy. And they put their energy into now coming up with a new way, a better way, a different way. So they have self-belief, they have energy, and a very, very important point, which I'm going to come back to again just now, is what we call internal locus of control. And if you look at psychology and you look at people, we differentiate between an internal locus of control and an external locus of control. Internal locus of control is basically an attitude or an inner belief that says, if something has gone wrong, it's because I let it go wrong, and maybe I did, but it has gone wrong. I'm in control. So if my boss is unhappy with what I've done, it's not cool, but what am I going to do about it, and how do I fix it? So internal locus of control says I am in control. External locus of control says I am a victim. All right, life happens to me, and there's nothing I can do about changing life. So basically, people who've got a resilient attitude have this inner belief that I am in control. I might not influence what happened to me, but I can influence how I deal with what happens to me. And then the fourth element is optimism, and that's not a blind, silly optimism of everything's going to be perfect, but it's an optimism of saying, hey, if we work on these things, it will get better. So you can see resilience as being an attitude, self-belief, energy, internal locus of control, optimism. It's seen often, and correctly so, resilience is also an element of EQ or EI, emotional intelligence. So a very, very important element of emotional intelligence is what people like Goldman talk about as motivation. They call it motivation. I prefer calling it resilience. But what Goldman is referring to when he talks about emotional intelligence and emotional quotient is people with EQ have the ability exactly to do what I've said, which is bounce back. They maintain energy. They keep going. They don't give up. And so they have this, it is an ability to bounce back. They have a mindfulness, self-insight and self-awareness. So they know what they're feeling. They know what they're going through. They have an awareness of others. They know what they're feeling. They know what others are feeling, and they are aware of what's happening, right? And that is then an ability to bounce back, or as I say, Goldman talks about motivation. They keep going. So we can see resilience at an individual level. Certain people have that resilient attitude. It is a component of your emotional intelligence or your EQ, your emotional quotient. It's also quite often a foundation of resilience is an effective support network. In other words, I've got people who support me. I know that if I'm going through a tough time, I can bounce ideas. I can share my frustrations. I've got a family that I can talk to. I've got a spouse that I can talk to. I've got friends. So quite often people need that effective support network, and you will find that people who lack that network quite often will battle to have that level of resilience. I personally believe that resilience comes from within. It's your attitude, it's your EQ, but it does help to have the social support, the friends and the family environment. So it's being able to utilize that effectively and to realize that you're not alone in all of this. And when we had a whole lot of parents trying to suddenly do homeschooling and become teachers when they didn't know anything about teaching, and then they could phone their friend who's dealing with the same issue, that helps. You can share ideas, you can share frustrations, you can share fears. Resilience is also an element of effective stress management. In other words, people who can manage stress effectively seem to be able to be more resilient, because it is very stressful to go through a crisis like this. And if I'm going to allow myself to be overwhelmed by that stress, then basically I'm going to battle to bounce back. And then we also have the ability to reframe. And this is a very, very important point. And again, I'll come back to that. And it also links to the internal locus of control. The ability to redefine and to change one's views of a situation, to be realistic or pragmatic in your optimism. So the ability to reframe, the ability to say what has happened now is not what I wanted and not what I planned. Now, how do I reframe that? How do I change that? Okay, so I may have gone into 2020 expecting a great year. This was the year where I was probably going to be able to upgrade my home. Perhaps this was the year where I was going to be able to afford certain things, and I had a picture in my mind of what I wanted to achieve in 2020, and I've got a promotion, and this is going to help me now to afford this, or to do this, or to spend time there, or to undertake something. And suddenly that has changed because I have lost part of my income. If I'm fortunate, I still have a job. So basically, what am I going to do to redefine how do I manage this? It's not cool, it's not ideal, it's not what I wanted, but people who've got resilience will say, okay, let's take a step back, let's redefine, and let's change a view of how do we focus on this. And they are realistic and they are optimistic, but there is a pragmatism to that. So those are some of the core points in terms of what do we see in individuals that have got resilience. What is the foundation of that? And therefore, to develop this. So that's what it looks like. How do I develop this at an individual level? Firstly, coming back to my previous point, is to reframe. And reframing is to be able to say, okay, not what I planned. This year was going to be a great year. I was going to do different things. I can't do different things. So let's see, what can I do? All right. So despite the difficulties, what can I do? What action can I take? And to start taking action. In a time of crisis, resilience does require action. I may not know what's going on, but if I can start doing stuff, it gives me something to do rather than just sitting and thinking about how bad things are. Said I was going to come back to the internal locus of control, and that to me is a very important point, and something that we've used for years in psychotherapy and therapy with people. And that internal locus of control is an indicator of success, I've already said. And just an interesting example, a form of therapy that we use in psychology is RET, rational emotive therapy. And this is where reframing becomes so important. And basically, it's just a very interesting and simple concept is many people believe that A leads to C. A is an activating event and C is a consequence. So, for example, maybe I lose my job. That is the event. The consequence is I am depressed. So because I lost my job, I am depressed. And that kind of makes sense, but it doesn't make sense, all right? Because between A and C, you have B, and B is the belief. All right, so A does not lead to C, A plus B leads to C. So A is the activating event, which leads to consequence. No, activating event plus the belief associated with that event leads to the consequence. So let's have a look at that example of mine again. Let's imagine I lose my job, activating event. And I always thought, hey, that makes me depressed. And that's not true. What happens is I lose my job. I have a belief that this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. It's even worse than death. Then I will be depressed. If I can change, because I can't change the event, but if I can change or reframe the belief, I lost my job. It is not cool. It is not what I wanted. It is not nice. However, it is not the end of the world. Let's see what we can do. If I have a different belief, guess what? Yeah, I'm not happy, but I'm not sitting in a state of total depression. So A plus B leads to C, and that's why reframing is so important. That internal locus of control. Things happened to me, they were not in my control. They were not cool. It's not what I wanted, not what I hoped for. However, I've been hit with a curveball. We've all been hit with a curveball via COVID-19. So what am I going to do? How do I deal with this? Okay. Another thing that one needs to do at an individual level is to focus, prioritize, and manage time. What happens with many people in a crisis is they get caught up into this crisis. There's elements of self-pity, understandable. There's elements of depression and stress and anxiety. And what happens as a result of that stress and anxiety and depression is we lose focus and we don't do anything. We don't prioritize. So what is a very good thing to do when one is going through that crisis and through a difficult time is to focus. Okay, I can't change this, but I can do A and I can do B. And out of that list of A, B, C, and D that I can do and I should do, let's prioritize, which is number one. And how much time am I going to allocate to one? How much time to two? How much time to three? Et cetera, et cetera. And just to give you a basic example, when we went into lockdown, that had a major impact on my life, like it did on many people's lives. Because as much as I do work with Strathmore, a fair percentage of my income comes from other places, and suddenly that was gone. So I needed to say, okay, I can't do this and that. It's not what I planned. So what can I do? And basically, I set myself up in my office. I determined the core actions I could take. I prioritized which I was going to do. And then I set aside time. So much time will be on A and B and C. And as much as it didn't solve the problem, it did in a fair degree, because it gave me things to focus on. It allowed me to develop different markets. It allowed me to achieve new things. So we have to focus, prioritize, and then allocate and manage time to that. And then obviously you need the self-discipline and the energy. It's all good, and we all know this. We have a list of things to do, of focus areas. We have a priority of what to do. We know how much time we should do, but then you need to actually discipline yourself to do that and focus energy. And then just some final points at an individual level. Adopt a tough and gentle approach with yourself. And that's an interesting point. Tough. It is tough, guys. If we're going to say I'm going to spend X amount of time learning a new language, well, let me spend that time. If I say that I can't go to the gym, but I can work out in a different way, but it's not as much fun, well, let's make sure that I'm tough. If I did not do my workout, I did not do my exercise, that's not okay. And if I should have done it at 6 in the morning and I didn't, well, then I will do it at 6 o'clock at night. You've got to be tough on yourself, but also be gentle. And understand that it is tough. And yes, you're going to slip occasionally. So that's the tough and the gentle. Get busy, do something. All right? Don't wallow in self-pity. Get off your backside and do something. As I've already said, use your social support network, capitalize on it, develop a greater network. And something that's interesting when you're going through a tough time is help others. Because the chances are, if you're going through a tough time because of COVID-19, I can almost promise you others are going through a tougher time. So get off your backside and help others. At least you're focusing on making a difference. So that's at an individual level. At an organizational level, you with your team and your department, as a leader, you can work at varying levels. You can try and create resilience in your team, your department, your organization in terms of organizational culture. In other words, a supportive environment that fosters innovation, ideas, and action. And I'd like to believe that Java has over the years created a fairly effective style of leadership. I don't see Java as this autocratic, punitive culture. So I think you've already got a pretty good supportive environment. So foster that culture, allow people to come up with ideas, allow people to take action, allow people to be creative, because that gives them something to do. It also gives Java some ideas of how to do things. So it's working at creating that culture, or hopefully perpetuating a culture of ideas and suggestions. We're not just victims. Another one which becomes important if you want to build resilience at an organizational level, and that is to look at organizational practices, procedures, and to eliminate bottlenecks. And again, I'd like to believe that Java has got a fairly effective set of practices and procedures. But in large organizations, there tend to be 101 policies and procedures, and you can't do A and you can't do B, and you can only do C, and you can only do it on Monday or Tuesday. And in times of crisis, if you want a resilient team, they've got to come up with ideas, and they've got to be able to implement them and try them. This is not the time to say, but according to the procedures, we can't do that. That doesn't mean you negate or give up all your safety and your quality procedures. You can also look at developing and building resilience in your department through your leadership style. All right. The focus of the session is on how do you display resilience as an individual as well. Support networks, get your people into sub-teams. If you know that there's a whole lot of people in a branch or a level in a branch that is battling, get them to support each other, get them onto a WhatsApp group, get them into ways where they can help and support each other. You can capitalize on technology, and I'm sure you're doing that already through your WhatsApp and your Facebook and your Twitter, etc. So we can work at developing a resilient organization through the culture, through the practices and eliminating bottlenecks, through your leadership style, through the networks. All right, you also need to maintain your own level of resilience. You cannot have the manager being despondent. Now, that doesn't mean you've just got to have a happy face. Be genuine, be honest about, hey, this is tough, guys, but you need to show your resilience, because I cannot work for you when you are down. All right, you've got to be showing that resilience and that optimism, bounded optimism, realistic optimism, but you've got to show that. Empathy, aware of others. I think that's fairly obvious. Provide direction. As we've said earlier, in terms of crisis, people need to know what to do. And you might not have the answer, certainly in the early days of a crisis, but get people working on stuff. If you don't know the answer, get them to find the answer, get them to find information. So you basically provide direction, you keep them focused, you get them working on things. As I say there, you prioritize. So give them a list of things to do and then give them their priority and break it into bite-sized pieces. Because when people are feeling overwhelmed, they don't know where to start. So break it down into bite-sized pieces. I want you to do A to E. However, you're going to start with A. Within A, I need you to do this element and that element and then come back to me. Give people direction, give them focus. Monitor and manage energy levels. In other words, pick up when is that energy dipping? When are the fears coming into play? All right. Promote internal locus of control. When people are despondent, they probably have a right to be despondent, but what are we doing? What can we do? What could we do? How should we go about addressing it? If we don't have an answer, let's find information. So there's a whole lot of things we can do to develop resilience as individuals and also at an organizational level in your team. Couple of other points: be positive, reframe. All right, so yes, this is not cool. It's not what we wanted. I may have just become the manager of a new branch of Java. I had great ideas at the beginning of this year, and suddenly the carpet has been pulled out and maybe we're still operating, but we're operating on 30%. Okay, let's reframe. How do we make the best out of this? Another one is listen to your people, but very important, hear the words and the underlying emotions. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, communication, as they say, is 93% non-verbal. So it's not what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. And as I've said, you're going to be tough with yourself and gentle with yourself, and you've also got to be tough and gentle with your team. Tough on action. We said we're going to do this. It needs to be done. I need this information. I need that information. I need this sorted, and you need to be tough because they're going to lose focus and go in different directions. But as much as you're going to be tough on that action, you've got to be gentle on understanding what they are dealing with, how they're dealing with it. So you need that balanced process between the two. So there's a whole lot of things we can do at an organizational level, at an individual level. We're talking about how we need to lead in our organization. I finish off by saying, get people busy, get them to do something. Right? If we can't make money now, let's build for the future. Let's build our brand. Let's build contact with our customers. And another one is, just as it helps you to help people, get them to help people. I had an organization which was going through a very tough time in 2008, and revenue was down, and they were battling to make ends meet, and they had a whole lot of people who didn't have a lot to do. And basically, they got them to go and work in charities and help them set up things in charities, do work in charities. Because if they were going to sit at the office and not doing much, well, then they might as well help others and gave them a focus. And people are always happier when they are contributing to others. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm kind of rushing here at the end, but those are basically some of the ideas and suggestions of how do we lead through a crisis, but also some ideas around resilience. So basically now, time for questions. Thank you for your time. Let me stop sharing there and let's see if there are some questions, and let's use the chat, or you can just switch off your mic and ask a question. Thank you very much. Ask a couple of questions for myself. If I'm looking at you guys in Java, and perhaps you can just use the chat function here, what are some of the biggest challenges you guys have with your teams? All right, and let's perhaps ask it in two ways. What are some of the biggest challenges you have in managing within Java at this stage? I just want to have a look at Chris, your question. If one does make a mistake in empathy, back from it. Chris, let me just make sure I'm understanding you. If one makes a mistake in empathy, in other words, am I hearing you correctly? You're not showing empathy. So in other words, you kind of, I want this done, get it done. Why have you not done it? Meanwhile, this person is sitting at home trying to assist their child or something like that. How do you come back from that? I don't know the perfect answer, but you probably raise that issue with that person or those people. You acknowledge that you did not show empathy. You kind of politely apologize, say, hey guys, I clearly didn't realize you were dealing with A and B. Really sorry. Remember, we do need to still deal with and achieve this. However, guys, I do realize it's quite tough, and perhaps I wasn't sensitive enough to what you guys are dealing with. So Chris, I think this is where you've got to be man enough or woman enough to, if you did make a mistake, to kind of bounce, to acknowledge it and say, hey, sorry, I misread the situation. I forgot that you guys were dealing with this. And basically, I apologize. I still want that done, but let's see if we can find a way that works for you guys as well. Okay. I'm just having a look at the chat here. Charles, being fair and firm and remaining accountability to one's team or to the team one is leading. So basically, it's to be fair and firm and remaining accountable. So some of the challenges that you're dealing with in Java, if I'm hearing you correctly, Charles, it is about being fair, but also firm. And I think that's probably what I'm talking about when I'm saying that tough and gentle. Guys, we're in a crisis. We have to do the best we can. We need whatever information we can. If I'm going to get less feet through the door, let's get as many as possible. And if there's someone next door who's selling the same product or similar, I want them to come to my branch and not another one. I need the people through the door. We need to get them there. But hey, I know that it's tough. So there's that empathy. I know it's tough, but that doesn't compromise on those standards. And it is, and I think you're right, that's probably one of the challenges. Pauline, challenge is mainly dealing with staff who have perhaps taken a pay cut and work has to be done. Firmness or empathy or use it is what it is. And yes, that's part of the challenge, a big part of the challenge. And that's where, and it's a tough one, guys, that's where the reframing has to come in, because basically I've got a person, and I'm sure you're in this situation, you've got a person, the person has taken a 30-40% salary cut. They hurting, all right? They were already stretched before the pay cut and they're hurting. And how the hell do I get them to now perform? Because now you get this attitude, well, you're only paying me 50% of what you should. Why should I work? And that's, it's understandable, but it's incorrect. And how do I reframe and say, guys, you know what, certain people have nothing, and how do we maximize what we've got? And this is not cool, and it's not ideal, and it's not nice, and I know that, but guys, let's do the best that we can. So it is kind of a firmness, but it is empathy. I'm understanding where you're coming from, but there's no point, guys, in now feeling sorry for yourself because you're only getting 60%. Yes, you can feel sorry for yourself. We still have to do as good a job. In fact, we probably have to do a better job earning 60% than we did when we were earning 100%, because we've got to keep this company going. We've got to keep surviving. And that is a very, very tough challenge for you guys as managers. And it's gentle, but it's tough. The other thing that I've noticed, and it's not highly scientific, but what I've noticed is you start off and you get people to accept, yeah, it's tough, and they kind of motivated, and yes, I've got a salary cut, but we need to make it work. And then it tends to drop off, because then reality hits and it's not so easy. And basically you probably got to do this continuously, up and down and up and down. So a key point, and that applies to motivation at any time, is you do not motivate somebody in January and they're done for the year. You know that. So you are continuously understanding your people and differentiating between Mr. A and Mrs. B, and what do I do with Mr. Person and that person. So you're always motivating. But probably in a time of crisis, you need to keep that consistency, and you've got to continuously maintain three things, probably, and there could be more. You got to continuously maintain focus, that toughness, guys. We have to deliver this. But hey, empathy, I know that it's tough. And third one is motivation. So you are working harder at motivation and focus and performance now than you would normally have to, because people will dip, they will relapse. Right? You give me a speech, yeah, okay, we got to make this work. So you sitting with a situation in Java, as I would imagine we're seeing in many companies in South Africa, where, hey guys, let's just get through this. Let's keep this branch open. All right, let's just make enough money to keep the branch open, to pay the salaries we have to, and to justify our existence. I need all hands on deck, even if you have taken a salary cut. And I need people to understand that. And I can get them to understand that, but I need to understand they then become despondent, they fall back, and then again, I've got to lift them. So you're continuously lifting and lifting to try and maintain that energy and that focus. Very, very tough. But we've always said, or I've always said, being a manager is easy and in good times. You know you're a good manager. You know you're a good leader in tough times. This is where your leadership skills comes to the fore. Good. Any other questions, comments? Cool. From my side, I'm going to wrap it up fairly soon. Oh, Kigali, that's cool. That's cool. Great challenge is having had some of my staff lose jobs, then work with minimal staff who feel they are putting, yeah, correct. Minimal staff who feel they're putting in too much yet receiving less, 100%. This is where, and I'm seeing it in organizations here in South Africa, where basically we've got an organization which is on probably what, 50-60% complement, far fewer people. They're expected to still make money. These people now don't have to only work half what they had to, they're working even more than they had to. And again, Maliki, a major challenge, and it's the ability to keep people going. It's the ability to keep people having that picture. And the picture has to be, guys, we're in a crisis, let's get through it. If I can keep this branch going, if we can keep this branch going, if we can at least make sure we're covering our costs, we're doing as much as we can, then when we get through this, we're going to be able to get back to where we were, or back to a new normal, whatever that may be. But let's focus and let's get through this. We do need to try as much as we can, which is not easy, to keep a longer term, keep the longer term focus. And that's not the couple of years. That's let's get through this, guys. Let's get back to where we want to be. Let's get back to where we should be. Let's go through the tough times. And it's a bit dramatic, but I suppose it is true in a time of war. In a time of war, and you look at our great leaders in the past in wartime, and one of them possibly was, certainly from a war point of view, was Winston Churchill. There's questions about other issues. But in war times, Winston Churchill had the ability to get people to buy into and to accept unpleasant stuff. If you go back, and from what you've heard and what I've read, in the UK, he got people to accept that there was, I don't know, food rationing, and you couldn't get this and you couldn't get that, and everybody was committed to that because they knew they were contributing to the fighting of a war. And I think we need, as dramatic as that sounds, to kind of get that kind of leadership of, hey guys, we've got to get through this. Everyone's going to pull their weight. We understand how tough it is. We understand how difficult it is, but we have a role to play. These guys, Maliki, are not just doing a job, they're playing a role in terms of the future of their organization and the future that their colleagues and those who may not be employed possibly will have. Okay, easy to say, not so easy to do. Guys, any final comments? And then I'm going to wrap it up. Okay. Namo, I think I'm going to hand over to you, but from my side, thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you for listening. To my participants, looking forward to having you back in class one day, all right, back at Strathmore. We certainly miss you, and we can't wait to get back to real life lecturing. I must say, for me, it's been very interesting. We went into lockdown, which was hugely stressful because now I had to learn how to use Zoom and MS Teams and all of that stuff, which I managed to overcome. And that gave me a great sense of relief because now I could lecture again. And then I found that lecturing on Zoom was just not nearly as much fun as in the classroom. I really don't enjoy it, but it's the new way of doing things, hopefully not the new normal. So yes, I'm certainly looking forward to getting face-to-face where I can see people. As I said earlier, they reckon 93% of communication is non-verbal. So sitting, talking to my laptop screen is difficult. But guys, thank you very much for your time. Namu, if I can hand back to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm sure everybody has been excited about this session. To Carl, asante sana.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Nice to chat to all of you. Good luck. Thank you.